The large classroom buzzed with quiet conversations as cadets from different worlds settled into their seats. The morning light from Nexus Prime's artificial sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the room. Professor Veltar stood at the front, his 4 yellow eyes scanning the mixed group of young beings who would one day lead the galaxy's military forces. Minho slipped into his usual seat in the back row, keeping his head down as he always did. His dark hair fell across his face, hiding the careful way he watched everything around him. Next to him, Yuna was already reviewing her notes from the previous lesson, her fingers moving quickly across her tablet screen. "You're late again," she whispered without looking up. Her voice carried the slight accent of someone who had grown up speaking Korean before learning Galactic Standard. "Sorry," Minho replied softly. He had been in the training rooms again, practicing combat moves when he should have been sleeping. The nightmares made sleep difficult anyway. Around them, other cadets chatted about weekend plans and upcoming exams. The Thraxian students sat together, their blue-scaled skin gleaming under the lights. Their leader, Jorik, was telling a loud story about his family's military honors that stretched back 12 generations. The Zalani cadets listened politely, their large eyes blinking slowly as they processed the information in their careful way. Near the front, a group of Korthek students compared notes. Their gray, rocky skin made them look like living statues, but Minho knew they were among the smartest beings in the galaxy. They had been the first to develop faster than light. Travel and their military strategies were still studied across all the systems. The humans were scattered throughout the room. There were only 15 of them in the entire academy, making them one of the smallest groups. Most other species found humans strange and unpredictable. They called them the Mad Ones because humans seemed to do impossible things when they should have given up. Professor Veltar tapped his clawed hand against the desk, and the room fell silent. The old Korthek had fought in 3 different wars before becoming a teacher. His right arm was mechanical, replaced after a battle injury, and students respected him for his experience. "Today we study the Battle of Kepler 442, he announced. His voice was deep and rough like stones grinding together. This battle happened 3 years ago during the Fourth Empire's expansion into the outer colonies. Minho felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his face calm. Yuna glanced at him, noticing how still he had become. Professor Veltar activated the large screen at the front of the room. A star map appeared, showing the Kepler system with its planets and space stations marked in different colors. The Fourth Empire wanted to control the mining operations on Kepler 442, the professor continued. The planet had rare metals needed for their warships. They sent a full battle fleet with over 50,000 soldiers. The map changed to show the planet's surface. Green areas marked the civilian settlements, while red dots showed where the Vorth forces had landed. The human colony had only 3,000 people, Professor Veltar explained. Most were families of miners and scientists. They had no military base, no weapons, no way to fight back. Jorik raised his clawed hand. "Professor, why didn't they just surrender? It would have saved lives." Several alien students nodded in agreement. In most of their cultures, surrendering to a stronger enemy was the smart choice. Fighting when you could not win was seen as wasteful and foolish. "That is what makes this battle interesting," Professor Veltar replied. "The humans chose to resist. They held the Vorth forces back for 6 days, while evacuation ships arrived to save the civilians." The screen now showed combat footage. The images were grainy and shaky, recorded from helmet cameras and security systems during the fighting. Minho's hands began to shake slightly, and he gripped the edge of his desk. The human defenders were mostly untrained civilians, the professor said, as explosions flashed on the screen. They used mining equipment as weapons and turned their own buildings into fortresses. The Vorth expected an easy victory, but they found themselves in a brutal street-by-street battle. Yuna was taking notes, but she kept glancing at Minho. His breathing had become shallow, and sweat was forming on his forehead despite the cool air in the room. The footage shifted to show a narrow passage between two damaged buildings. Smoke filled the air, and the sound of plasma fire echoed from the speakers. In the distance, a lone figure in damaged power armor moved between cover points. "This is from day 4 of the battle," Professor Veltar said. By this time, most human, defenders had fallen back to the evacuation point, but someone stayed behind to hold this position. Intelligence reports show this passage was the only route the Vorth could use to reach the civilian ships. On screen, the armored figure fired with deadly accuracy. Each shot found its target, dropping Vorth soldiers as they tried to advance. The figure moved with fluid grace, rolling behind cover, reloading, and emerging to fire again. "Watch this. Technique," the professor said, slowing the footage. "See how he spins the rifle during the reload? This is not standard military training. This soldier developed his own fighting style." Minho's eyes were locked on the screen. He knew exactly what came next. The armored figure would throw a mining charge, use the explosion as cover, then advance to a better position. It was the move that had saved him when his ammunition ran low. The soldier held this position for 18 hours, Professor Veltar continued. Long enough for the last evacuation ships to escape with 50,000 civilians. When Galactic forces finally arrived to push back the Vorth, they found the passage filled with enemy bodies, but the defender was gone. The footage ended with static as the camera was destroyed by enemy fire. "Intelligence tried to identify this warrior," the professor said, "but his armor's transponder was damaged and no body was ever found. He was listed as missing in action. The Galactic Council awarded him the Star of Valor, but his name remains unknown. We call him the Ghost of Kepler." The classroom was quiet. Even Jorik, who usually had something to say about everything, sat in stunned silence. "This is why humans confuse us," Professor Veltar said. "By all logic, this soldier should have retreated." He was outnumbered 1,000 to 1. His position was hopeless, yet he stayed and fought, saving lives at the cost of his own. A Zalani student raised her hand. "Professor, do you think he knew he would die?" "I believe he did," the professor replied, "and that makes his choice even more remarkable. Humans seem to have something other species struggle to understand. They call it hope, but it looks like madness to us." Minho stared at the blank screen, where his younger self had been fighting for his life just moments before. Around him, his classmates whispered about human courage and sacrifice. None of them knew they were sitting next to the ghost they were discussing. Yuna touched his arm gently. "Are you okay?" she whispered. "You look pale." Minho nodded without speaking. How could he tell her that he was reliving the worst week of his life? How could he explain that the unknown hero they were studying was just a scared kid who had gotten separated from his family and fought because he had no other choice? The bell rang, ending the class. Students began packing their things and filing out. Professor Veltar reminded them about next week's exam on defensive strategies. Minho remained in his seat, unable to move. The ghost of Kepler was supposed to be dead, buried under the rubble of a colony that no longer existed. But here he was, alive and sitting in a classroom, listening to his own story being told like a legend. He closed his eyes and tried to push away the memories of smoke and blood and the weight of armor that was too big for his 16-year-old body. But the past had found him again, and this time he could not run away from it. Minho sat frozen in his chair as other students filed out of the classroom. His hands gripped the desk so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The images from the screen kept flashing in his mind, bringing back memories he had tried so hard to forget. Yuna packed her things slowly, watching him with worried eyes. She had known Minho for 2 years, and she had never seen him like this. Usually he was quiet but calm. Now he looked like he might be sick. "Minho," she said softly, "what's wrong?" You've been acting strange since the professor started the lesson. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. How could he explain that he had just watched himself fight for his life? That the heroic story everyone admired was actually the worst week he had ever lived through? "I'm fine," he finally managed to say. His voice sounded hollow and distant. Yuna frowned. She had grown up with 3 brothers, and she knew when someone was lying about being fine. "You don't look fine. You look like you've seen a ghost." The word ghost made Minho flinch. If only she knew how right she was. A few other students were still in the room, talking excitedly about the lesson. Near the front, Jorik was explaining to a group of younger cadets why the human soldiers' tactics were foolish. "He should have retreated," the Thraxian said, his blue scales shimmering as he gestured. "Any smart warrior knows when to run. Fighting alone against 1,000 enemies is not brave." "It's stupid!" A Korthek cadet nodded in agreement. "In our military history, such actions are seen as wasteful. One life cannot be worth more than tactical advantage." Minho felt anger rising in his chest. These aliens were talking about his choice, like it was a puzzle to solve. They didn't understand what it felt like to hear children crying in the evacuation ships. They hadn't seen families torn apart by war. "Maybe he had reasons we don't know about," said Hana, another human cadet. She was one of the few students who ever defended human actions in their discussions. "Maybe he knew something that made staying the right choice." Jorik laughed, a harsh sound that grated on Minho's nerves. What could a human know that military strategists don't? They're famous for making emotional decisions instead of logical ones. Professor Veltar had remained at his desk, organizing his notes for the next class. But Minho could see the old Korthek listening to the debate with interest. "The footage showed advanced combat techniques," Hana continued. "Whoever that soldier was, he had real training. The way he moved, the way he used his weapon. It wasn't random." "Training doesn't matter when you're outnumbered," another alien student said. "Even the best warrior can't fight forever." Minho's breathing became faster. These cadets were discussing his life like it was just another case study. They were judging his choices without knowing what it felt like to be 16 years old and watching your world burn around you. Professor Veltar played the footage again, focusing on a specific section, where the armored figure performed a complex reload technique. The movement was smooth and precise, like a dance that had been practiced thousands of times. "Look at this sequence," the professor said. "The soldier spins the rifle while changing power cells, then immediately transitions into a rolling movement. That brings him to perfect firing position. This is not something you learn in basic training." Minho knew that move by heart. He had invented it during long hours in the colony's training center, back when his biggest worry was impressing the other kids his age. His father had been a security guard, and he had taught Minho to shoot when he was 12. But the spinning technique was Minho's own creation, something he did because it felt natural. "Watch how he anticipates the enemy movement, Professor," Veltar continued. "He starts moving to his next position before the Vorth soldiers even appear. This shows battlefield awareness that comes from experience." Yuna was studying the footage carefully. As a tactics student, she had trained herself to notice details that others might miss. Something about the soldiers' movements seemed familiar, but she couldn't place where she had seen them before. Then the professor played a section where the soldier threw a mining charge and used the explosion to advance. As the smoke cleared, the figure emerged firing with both hands, taking down 3 enemies in rapid succession. Yuna's eyes widened. She had seen that exact technique before in the Academy's training rooms. She turned to look at Minho, who was staring at the screen with tears forming in his eyes. The professor played the sequence one more time, slowing it down to show each movement clearly. The soldier's dual weapon technique was unique and deadly. He fired with one rifle while reloading, the other switching between them so smoothly that his rate of fire never decreased. "This is impossible," Jorik said, shaking his head. No one can reload that fast while maintaining accuracy. But Yuna had seen someone do exactly that. During combat training exercises, she had watched Minho perform the same move dozens of times. His instructors called it the fastest reload technique they had ever seen, and they could never figure out how he did it. She looked at Minho again and noticed that his lips were moving slightly, as if he was counting something. Then she realized what he was doing. He was counting the shots being fired on screen, anticipating when the soldier would need to reload. The most impressive part, Professor Veltar said, is how the soldier manages his ammunition. He never runs out at a critical moment. He plans every shot, every reload, every movement. Minho's counting matched perfectly with the action on screen. Before each reload, he whispered the number under his breath. 3, 2, 1, and then the soldier would change power cells exactly when Minho expected. Yuna felt a chill run down her spine. There was only one way Minho could know when those reloads would happen. Only one reason why his movements in training matched what they were seeing on screen. The footage reached the part where the soldier made his final stand. Enemy fire had damaged his armor, and smoke poured from the power systems. But he kept fighting, using debris as cover and making every shot count. "That's me," Minho whispered so quietly that only Yuna could hear him. She stared at him in shock. "What did you say?" The words seemed to come out of Minho on their own, as if he could no longer hold them inside. "That's me," he said again, louder. This time, Jorik heard him and turned around with a mocking smile. "Sure it is, human. Every cadet claims to be a war hero. Next you'll tell us you single-handedly defeated the entire Vorth Empire." "No," Minho said, standing up on shaking legs. His voice was stronger now, filled with pain and certainty. "That's actually me. I was there." The classroom fell completely silent. Even Professor Veltar stopped organizing his papers and looked up with surprise. "I know that move because I created it," Minho continued. "I know when the reloads happen because I lived through every second of that fight. I know how that armor feels when it's damaged because I wore it for 6 days straight." Jorik laughed again, but it sounded forced and uncertain. "That's impossible. The ghost of Kepler died 3 years ago. Everyone knows that." "Everyone was wrong," Minho said. His hands were shaking, but his voice remained steady. "I didn't die. I just got lucky enough to survive what I thought would be my last day." Yuna's mind raced as pieces clicked into place. Minho's combat skills that impressed even veteran instructors. His knowledge of weapon systems that went beyond normal training. The way he sometimes woke up screaming in the middle of the night, though he always claimed it was just stress from exams. Professor Veltar stood up slowly, his 4 eyes focused entirely on Minho. "That is a serious claim, Cadet. The ghost of Kepler is considered one of the greatest military heroes in recent history." "I never wanted to be a hero," Minho replied. "I just wanted to go home. But the Vorth were between me and the evacuation ships, so I had to fight through them." The room was so quiet that everyone could hear the air recycling systems humming in the walls. Students who had been debating human military tactics just moments before now stared at the quiet boy they had barely noticed. "If you are truly the ghost of Kepler," Professor Veltar said carefully, "then you can prove it. There are details about that battle that were never made public." Minho nodded slowly. He had known this moment would come eventually. He had hoped to finish his training and disappear into some distant assignment where no one would ask questions about his past. But now the truth was out, and there was no going back. "The mining charge I threw wasn't military equipment," he said. "It was a demolition pack from the colony's construction site. I set the timer for 4 seconds instead of 6 because I knew the Vorth soldiers would try to throw it back." Professor Veltar's eyes widened. That detail had been in the classified military report, but it was never shared with the public. "The dual weapon technique worked because I was using mining rifles, not military weapons," Minho continued. "They have longer power cells and different reload mechanisms. Standard combat rifles wouldn't have worked the same way." more classified information. The professor's expression changed from skepticism to amazement. Yuna reached out and grabbed Minho's hand. It was ice cold and trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Minho looked at her with eyes that seemed much older than his 20 years. "Because the ghost of Kepler is supposed to be dead. I wanted to keep it that way." The next morning, Minho found himself sitting in a small room with white walls and no windows. 3 high-ranking officers sat across from him at a metal table. Admiral Sora, the Academy's human commander, studied him with sharp eyes. Beside her sat General Kextal, a massive Korthek with battle scars covering his rocky skin. The third officer was Colonel Thrain, a Zalani whose large eyes seemed to look right through him. Yuna sat in a chair near the wall. She had asked to be present, and Admiral Sora had agreed. The Admiral knew that humans often performed better when they had emotional support from friends. "State your full name for the record," Admiral Sora said. Her voice was calm but serious. "Kim Minho," he replied. "Born on Earth Sol District, transferred to Kepler 442 with my family when I was 14. General Kextal consulted a datapad with thick fingers. According to colonial records, Kim Minho was listed among the missing presumed dead after the Vorth attack. How did you survive?" Minho took a deep breath. He had practiced this story in his head for 3 years, but saying it out loud was different. "My family was in the first group to reach the evacuation ships, but I got separated during a Vorth air attack. When I found my way to the landing zone, the ships were already loading the last groups." "Continue," Admiral Sora said gently. She could see the pain in his eyes as he remembered. The Vorth ground forces were advancing fast. Someone had to slow them down, or the evacuation ships wouldn't have time to escape. The colony's security chief was organizing a defense, but most of his people were already dead or wounded. Colonel Thrain leaned forward. "You were 16 years old with no military training. Why didn't you board an evacuation ship?" "I tried," Minho said. "But there was a problem with the ship I was supposed to board. The loading ramp was damaged by enemy fire. By the time they fixed it, the Vorth were too close. The ship had to leave. Without me." Yuna listened with growing understanding. She had always wondered why Minho seemed older than other cadets his age. Now she knew why. He had been forced to grow up fast during the worst possible circumstances. "Where did you get the power armor?" General Kextal asked. "It belonged to a dead security guard," Minho replied. "The armor was too big for me, and half the systems were broken, but it was better than nothing." Admiral Sora made notes on her tablet. "How did you learn to fight so effectively? The footage shows advanced combat techniques." "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12, Minho explained. "He was a security guard on Earth before we moved to Kepler. I spent a lot of time at the colony's training center. I guess I was good at it." "Good at it is an understatement," Colonel Thrain said. "You held off an entire battalion for 18 hours. That requires more than natural talent." Minho was quiet for a moment. He had never talked about the details of the battle before. "I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just scared and angry. The Vorth had destroyed my home and separated me from my family. I didn't know if I would ever see them again." "What happened after the battle?" Admiral Sora asked. "The passage collapsed during the final Vorth assault," Minho said. "I was trapped under rubble for 2 days before rescue teams found me. By then, the official casualty reports had already been filed. I was listed as missing and presumed dead. General..." Kextal frowned. "Why didn't you correct the records?" "Your family believed you were dead." "I was in a medical facility for 3 months, Minho replied. "Head injuries, broken bones, psychological trauma. When I recovered enough to think clearly, I learned that my family had been relocated to a safe world in the inner systems. They had already held a memorial service for me." Yuna felt tears forming in her eyes. She couldn't imagine the pain of learning that your family had grieved for you and moved on. "I decided it was better to let them think I was dead," Minho continued. "They were safe and starting new lives. I didn't want to bring them back into the war zone by revealing I was alive. So you created a new identity, Admiral Sora said. It wasn't hard, Minho admitted. The refugee camps were chaotic. Documentation was incomplete. I used the name of a boy who had died during the evacuation but whose death wasn't recorded properly. I became Kim Minho, the refugee, instead of Kim Minho, the dead hero. Colonel Thrain consulted her own data pad. Your academy application shows exceptional test scores and physical abilities. How did you qualify with false documentation? The scores were real, Minho said. I spent 2 years in refugee camps and there wasn't much to do except study and train. I wanted to make sure I could get into the academy when I was old enough to apply. Admiral Sora leaned back in her chair. Let me understand this correctly. You survived one of the most famous battles in recent history, let your family believe you were dead, created a false identity, and spent 3 years preparing to join the military again? Yes, ma'am. Why? General Kextal asked. You could have revealed your identity and lived as a hero. The Galactic Council would have given you anything you wanted. Minho looked down at his hands. Because being a hero didn't bring back the people who died. It didn't fix my broken family or rebuild the colony. All it did was make me feel guilty for surviving when others didn't. The room was quiet for several minutes. The officers exchanged glances, communicating without words in the way that experienced military leaders could. Admiral Sora activated a scanner built into the table. We need to verify your identity using biometric data from the battle. Footage. This will compare your current physical characteristics with what we can extract from the armor's sensors. The scanner hummed as it analyzed Minho's face, hands, and posture. Holographic displays showed various measurements and comparisons. Everyone waited tensely as the computer processed the information. Match confirmed, the computer announced. Subject identity matches archived biometric data from Kepler 442 battle site. Probability, 99.7%. General Kextal stared at Minho with something like awe. You really are the ghost of Kepler. I never liked that name, Minho said quietly. Colonel Thrain stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the Academy's training grounds. Do you realize what this means? You're not just any cadet. You're a living legend. Military academies across the galaxy study your tactics. Your battle is required reading in strategic planning courses. I know, Minho replied. That's why I didn't want anyone to find out. Admiral Sora deactivated the scanner. I'm afraid it's too late for that now. Word is already spreading through the Academy. By tomorrow, every military base in the galaxy will know that the ghost of Kepler is alive and training to become an officer. Yuna spoke for the first time since the interrogation began. What happens to him now? That depends on several factors, Admiral Sora said. First, we need to verify his story with surviving witnesses from Kepler 442. Second, we need to assess the security implications of his revealed identity. Third, we need to decide how to handle the political and media attention this will generate. I just want to finish my training and serve quietly somewhere, Minho said. I don't want fame or special treatment. General Kextal laughed, a sound, like rocks grinding together. Young human, you single-handedly changed the course of a battle and saved 50,000 lives. Quiet service is no longer an option for you. The Vorth Empire will be particularly interested in this news, Colonel Thrain added. They've spent 3 years wondering who defeated their elite forces. Learning that their mystery opponent is still alive and training to fight them again will make you a priority target. Admiral Sora gathered her papers. For now, you'll remain at the Academy under protective observation. We need time to develop a security plan and decide on your future. Assignment. Your training will continue, but with additional restrictions for your safety. What about my classmates? Minho asked. Will they treat me differently now? Probably, Admiral Sora admitted. Some will see you as a hero to admire. Others will see you as a weapon to be used. A few might resent the attention you receive. You'll need to learn how to handle all of those reactions. Yuna reached over and squeezed Minho's hand. You won't have to handle it alone. I'll help you. Admiral Sora smiled slightly. That's good. He'll need friends who knew him before the truth came out. People who can remind him that he's still the same person, regardless of what others call him. As the meeting ended, Minho felt a strange mix of relief and terror. The secret that had weighed on him for 3 years was finally out. But now he faced a new challenge, learning to live as the ghost of Kepler instead of just being Minho, the quiet cadet. Outside the interrogation room, news of his identity was already spreading through the Academy's communication networks. By evening, every cadet would know that they had been sitting next to a living legend for 2 years without realizing it. The ghost had finally returned from the dead, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days after the interrogation, Minho discovered that his quiet life at the Academy was over forever. He woke up to find a crowd of younger cadets waiting outside his dormitory building. They stood in small groups, whispering excitedly and pointing when they saw him emerge. "There he is," one of them said loudly. "That's the ghost of Kepler." Minho pulled his jacket hood up and tried to walk quickly to the dining hall, but the crowd followed him. Some kept a respectful distance, but others pushed closer, asking questions he didn't want to answer. "Is it true you killed 100 Vorth soldiers by yourself?" a young Thraxian cadet asked. "Can you teach me the spinning rifle technique?" called out a human first year. "My instructor says you're the greatest warrior in the galaxy," added a Zalani student. Minho didn't respond to any of them. He just kept walking, hoping they would lose interest and leave him alone. But the crowd only grew, larger as more cadets joined to see what the excitement was about. In the dining hall, conversation stopped when he entered. Hundreds of eyes followed him as he got his breakfast and looked for somewhere to sit. His usual table was surrounded by curious onlookers. Even the serving staff stared at him with amazement. Yuna was already sitting at a corner table, and she waved him over. She had saved him a seat with his back to the wall, away from most of the crowd. As he sat down, she gave him a sympathetic smile. "How are you holding up?" she asked quietly. "I feel like a zoo animal," Minho replied. "Everyone wants to stare at me and ask questions." At the next table, a group of senior cadets were discussing him loudly enough for him to hear. They debated whether his tactics at Kepler 442 could be taught to other soldiers, or if his success was just luck. "I heard the Academy wants to study his genetics," one of them said. "They think humans might have some kind of berserker gene that activates during combat." Minho nearly choked on his food. "They want to do what?" Yuna frowned. "That's ridiculous. You're not some kind of science experiment." But the rumors continued throughout the morning. During physical training, other cadets watched his every move, trying to copy his techniques. In tactical studies class, the instructor asked him to demonstrate combat maneuvers for the other students. Even in basic mathematics, classmates whispered about him instead of paying attention to the lesson. The worst part came during lunch when Professor Veltar approached their table with another instructor that Minho didn't recognize. "Cadet Kim," Professor Veltar said formally. "This is Dr. Renhai from the Academy's Research Division. She would like to speak with you about participating in a study." Dr. Renhai was a tall Korthek with gleaming metal implants around her eyes that made her look like a machine. She smiled, but it didn't reach her enhanced eyes. "We're very interested in understanding how you achieved such remarkable results at Kepler 442, she said. "Our initial hypothesis suggests that humans may possess unique psychological and physical traits that enhance combat performance under extreme stress." "You want to study me like a lab rat," Minho said flatly. "Not at all," Dr. Renhai replied. "We simply want to run some tests to better understand human capabilities. Brain scans, hormone level analysis, reaction time measurements. Nothing invasive." Yuna stood up suddenly. "He said no." Dr. Renhai looked surprised. I don't believe... Cadet Kim has given his answer yet. Yes, he has, Yuna said firmly. When someone calls your research plan studying them like a lab rat, that's a no. Professor Veltar cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss this later, when emotions are less heightened. After the instructors left, Minho put his head in his hands. This is exactly what I was afraid of. They don't see me as a person anymore. I'm just the ghost of Kepler, some kind of military curiosity to be examined and analyzed. That's not true, Yuna said, sitting back down. I still see you as Minho, the same person who helps me with combat training and falls asleep during history lectures. But everyone else sees the legend, Minho replied. Even Jorik has been treating me differently. Yesterday he asked if I would honor his family by teaching his younger brother to fight. 3 days ago he was calling human tactics stupid. It was true. The Thraxian cadet who had mocked human military strategies now treated Minho with the kind of respect usually reserved for war heroes. Jorik had even offered to carry Minho's books to class, which was a significant gesture in Thraxian culture. That afternoon, things got worse during combat simulation training. The exercise was supposed to be a simple squad-based scenario, but Minho's teammates kept deferring to him for every decision. When he tried to follow the established plan, they insisted he take command. You're the expert, said Day, another human cadet. We should do whatever you think is best. The exercise has a set objective and predetermined roles, Minho protested. I'm supposed to be the support gunner, not the squad leader. But you're the ghost of Kepler, Dai replied. You know more about combat than any of us. The simulation became a disaster. Instead of working as a team, everyone just watched Minho and waited for him to solve every problem. When the exercise ended in failure, the instructor blamed poor teamwork and communication. After class, Minho walked alone to the Academy's observation deck. It was usually quiet there with a view of the stars through reinforced windows. He needed space to think without crowds of admirers or researchers wanting to study him. Yuna found him there an hour later, staring out at the distant nebula that gave Nexus Prime its colorful skies. I brought you dinner, she said, setting down a tray of food. You missed the evening meal. I wasn't hungry, Minho replied without turning around. Yuna sat down beside him on the metal bench. Want to talk about what's bothering you? Everything, Minho said. 3 days ago, I was just another cadet trying to graduate and find a quiet assignment somewhere. Now I'm some kind of legend that everyone wants to either worship or dissect. Is that really what's bothering you? Yuna asked. Or is it something else? Minho was quiet for a long time before answering. During the simulation today, I had a panic attack. Yuna looked at him with concern. What happened? The scenario was urban combat, like Kepler 442. When the explosion started and the smoke filled the training room, I couldn't breathe. For a moment, I was 16 again, trapped in that passage with enemy soldiers trying to kill me. Did anyone notice? I don't think so. I managed to keep functioning until the exercise ended. But what if it happens during a real mission? What if I freeze up when people are counting on me? Yuna moved closer to him on the bench. You didn't freeze up at Kepler? You saved 50,000 people. That was different, Minho said. I was fighting for survival. I didn't have time to think about being scared. Now everyone expects me to be some kind of perfect warrior who never makes mistakes. Nobody's perfect, Yuna replied. Even legends are still human. Through the window, they watched a transport ship dock at one of the station's landing bays. New cadets were probably arriving for the next term, eager to begin their military training. Minho wondered if any of them would have to carry the weight of impossible expectations. I've been thinking about requesting a transfer, Minho said quietly. Where would you go? Somewhere far away. Maybe one of the border stations where nobody knows about the ghost of Kepler. I could finish my training in peace and serve without all this attention. Yuna shook her head. Running away won't solve anything. The story is already spreading across the galaxy. In a few weeks, every military base will know about you. Then what am I supposed to do? Learn to live with it, Yuna said. The attention will die down eventually. People will get used to having you around. You just need to give it time. What if I can't handle the pressure? What if I break down during a mission and get people killed? Yuna was quiet for a moment, thinking carefully about her answer. Do. You remember why you fought at Kepler 442? To protect the evacuation ships. And do you still want to protect people? Yes, Minho said without hesitation. Then that's what matters, Yuna replied. Not what other people call you or expect from you. If you keep focusing on protecting others instead of living up to your reputation, you'll be fine. They sat together, in comfortable silence, watching ships move between the stars. Minho felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Yuna had a way of making complicated problems seem simpler. There's something else I need to tell you, Minho said. Admiral Sora wants to meet with us tomorrow. She says the Academy has received communication from my family. Yuna's eyes widened. They know you're alive? Word travels fast in military circles. My father still has friends in the security forces. Someone recognized my name in the official reports. How do you feel about that? Minho sighed. Scared, happy, guilty, confused. They've spent 3 years grieving for me and moving on with their lives. Now, I have to explain why I let them think I was dead. They'll understand, Yuna said. Parents always forgive their children. I hope you're right, Minho replied. Because I don't know how to face them if they don't. As the artificial night cycle began on the station, they finally returned to the dormitory. Minho felt better than he had since his identity was revealed. He still didn't know how to handle being a legend, but at least he didn't have to figure it out alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The emergency alarm woke Minho at 3 in the morning. Red lights flashed in the corridors as cadets rushed to assembly points. This wasn't a drill. The real alarms had a different sound, sharper and more urgent than the practice alerts they were used to. Admiral Sora's voice echoed through the station's communication system. All senior cadets report to Briefing Room 7 immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Minho threw on his uniform and ran to the briefing room with dozens of other third-year cadets. Yuna arrived at the same time, her hair still messy from sleep, but her eyes alert and focused. Inside the briefing room, holographic displays showed star maps with flashing red markers. Admiral Sora stood at the front with several other high-ranking officers. Her expression was grim. 6 hours ago, Vorth Empire forces attacked the mining colony on Titan 7, she announced. They've taken control of the main settlement and are holding 3,000 civilians hostage. The room filled with worried murmurs. Titan 7 was only 2 days away from Nexus Prime. If the Vorth were operating that close to the Academy, it meant their expansion was accelerating. General Kextal stepped forward, his rocky features serious. Standard rescue protocols would take too long. By the time we mobilize a full military response, the hostages could be dead or transported to Vorth territory. What about the local defense forces? Asked Jorik. Destroyed in the initial attack. Admiral Sora replied. The colony's security was minimal. They never expected a direct assault. Colonel Thrain activated a detailed map of the colony. Intelligence suggests the Vorth are using the civilians as bait. They want to draw galactic forces into a trap where they can inflict maximum casualties. Minho stared at the map and felt a familiar chill run down his spine. The colony's layout was similar to Kepler 442. Narrow streets between industrial buildings with limited escape routes and plenty of places for enemy forces to hide. We're organizing a rapid response mission, Admiral Sora continued. A small team of experienced cadets will infiltrate the colony and create enough chaos to allow the hostages to escape. That's suicide, said Day. A few cadets against an entire Vorth occupation force? Not necessarily, General Kextel replied. The plan relies on speed, surprise, and precise coordination. Hit multiple targets simultaneously, force the enemy to spread their forces, then extract before they can organize a counterattack. Admiral Sora's eyes found Minho in the crowd. We need volunteers for this mission. I won't lie to you. It's extremely dangerous, and some of you might not come back. Several cadets raised their hands immediately, including Jorik and Day, but everyone in the room was looking at Minho, waiting to see if the ghost of Kepler would volunteer for another impossible mission. Minho felt the weight of their expectations, pressing down on him. This was exactly what he had feared. Everyone wanted him to be the legendary hero who could solve any problem with violence and determination. I need time to think, he said quietly. Admiral Sora nodded. You have 30 minutes to decide. The mission launches in 2 hours if we're going to reach Titan 7 before the situation deteriorates further. The briefing ended, and cadets filed out to consider their choices. Yuna walked with Minho to their usual spot on the observation deck. You're going, aren't you? She said. It wasn't really a question. I don't know, Minho replied. Part of me wants to volunteer. Those people need help, and I have experience with this kind of situation. But I'm terrified that I'll freeze up again. What if I have another panic attack at the worst possible moment? What if people die because I can't handle the pressure? Yuna sat down beside him on the metal bench. What happened during the simulation wasn't your fault. You have trauma from Kepler 442. That's normal for someone who survived what you went through. Normal doesn't help when people are counting on you to save them. Maybe that's the wrong way to think about it, Yuna said. You're not responsible for saving everyone. You're just one person on a team. Minho shook his head. You didn't see how the other cadets acted during training. They expect me to have all the answers. They want me to be the ghost of Kepler, not just Minho. Then don't be the ghost of Kepler, Yuna replied. Be Lieutenant Kim, the team leader, who uses his experience to help others succeed. What's the difference? The ghost of Kepler fights alone because he has no choice. Lieutenant Kim fights with a team because that's what good officers do. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching ships move between the stars. Minho thought about the civilians on Titan 7, probably huddled in buildings and wondering if anyone would come to help them. If I go on this mission, will you come with me? He asked. As what? I'm not a combat specialist. As my tactical advisor, Minho said. You're the smartest strategist in our class. If we're going to do this, we need someone who can think 3 steps ahead of the enemy. Yuna smiled. Are you offering me a position on your team? I'm asking my best friend to help me save some people. In that case, yes. I'll go with you. 20 minutes later, they returned to the briefing room. Admiral Sora was reviewing mission plans with the volunteers who had already committed. Jorik was there, along with Day and several other experienced cadets. I volunteer for the mission, Minho announced. But I have conditions. Admiral Sora raised an eyebrow. What conditions? I want Yuna as my tactical advisor. I want to review the mission plan and suggest modifications based on my experience at Kepler 442. And I want everyone to understand that I'm not the ghost of Kepler on this mission. I'm just another team member. That's not how legends work, General Kextal said. Whether you like it or not, your reputation will affect enemy morale and team dynamics. Then we use that to our advantage, Yuna said, stepping forward. Let the enemy think they're facing the legendary ghost of Kepler. Meanwhile, the real mission is being carried out by a coordinated team with proper tactical support. Admiral Sora considered this. Elaborate. Minho creates a distraction that draws enemy attention to one part of the colony, Yuna explained. While they're focused on stopping the famous human warrior, the rest of the team completes the real objectives in other areas. Using me as bait, Minho said. Using your reputation as a weapon, Yuna corrected. There's a difference. Over the next hour, they refined the mission plan. Minho would lead a diversionary assault on the colony's main communication center, making as much noise as possible. Meanwhile, 3 other teams would secure the hostages and prepare evacuation routes. The key was timing. Everything had to happen simultaneously, giving the Vorth forces too many problems to handle at once. As the teams prepared to depart, Jorik approached Minho in the equipment bay. "I owe you an apology," the Thraxian said. "I called your species foolish and emotional. I was wrong." "You weren't entirely wrong," Minho replied as he checked his rifle. "We do make emotional decisions sometimes, but that's not always a bad thing." "What do you mean?" "Logic says this mission is too dangerous. The smart choice would be to wait for reinforcements and accept that some hostages might die, but humans have trouble accepting that kind of math." Jorik's scaled face showed confusion. "So you're volunteering for an illogical mission?" "I'm volunteering because sometimes the illogical choice is the right one," Minho explained. "Sometimes you have to risk everything to save people, even when the odds are against you." The transport ship launched an hour later with 12 cadets aboard. Minho sat with his team, reviewing tactical displays and checking equipment. But his mind kept drifting to Kepler 442 and the scared 16-year-old who had picked up a rifle because he had no other choice. This time was different. He wasn't alone and desperate. He had a team, a plan, and a purpose beyond simple survival. He was still scared, but it was a different kind of fear. Not the terror of a trapped animal, but the focused concern of a leader responsible for other people's lives. "Approaching Titan 7, the pilot announced. "Enemy forces detected, initiating stealth approach." Yuna squeezed Minho's hand. "Ready?" "No," he admitted, "but let's do it anyway." The mission was flawlessly executed. While Minho's team attacked the communications center with spectacular explosions and dramatic firefights, the other teams quietly evacuated the hostages through underground tunnels. By the time the Vorth forces realized they had been deceived, the civilians were safely aboard evacuation ships. The cadets returned to Nexus Prime as heroes, but Minho felt different about the praise this time. Instead of feeling burdened by expectations, he felt proud of what his team had accomplished together. During the post-mission debriefing, Admiral Sora smiled at him. "How do you feel about being the ghost of Kepler now?" "I think I'm ready to be Lieutenant Kim instead," Minho replied. "The ghost can rest. I have work to do." 6 months later, Lieutenant Kim Minho graduated from the academy with tactical advisor Lieutenant Park Yuna at his side. They were assigned to a mixed-species patrol unit on the frontier, where human determination and alien precision worked together to protect the innocent. The legend of the Ghost of Kepler lived on in classrooms and training manuals. But the real Minho had finally found peace with his past and purpose in his future. He was no longer running from what he had been. He was building what he would become,